while we, I'm just, Michelle's just got to press record again. I have to fill in time. But just while we're doing that, I'll get Callam and Craig, Mona and Liz to turn their screens on and join me on the stage. Here they are. So we asked Indeed, I've always loved Callam Pickering's presentations that he does. The Economist with Indeed and his market insights and his economic outlook into the talent market are second to none. And whenever I get the opportunity to have him present for me, I always make sure I do. But what I wanted to also do was always, with any of our events, is to give you the talent acquisition or the HR insight as well. So reaching into my beautiful little network, these three lovely, lovely people joined me today. So we have Craig Wood, who's at APM. We have Mona Sadigh, who's at Citibank, and we have Mackay from Amazon. So we are looking at sort of healthcare, employee wellbeing today. We're looking at financial services, and of course, we've got a big old tech insight as well from Liz. So what I'm going to do is just ask each of you to introduce yourself quickly. And Callam, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm Indeed's APAC economist, focused mainly on Australia, and I've been with Indeed for 4.5 years now. So I spend most of my day looking into sort of labour market issues and doing research on those issues to get a better understanding of the dynamics across the Australian labour market. And obviously the past 18 months during the pandemic has been a pretty interesting period to be analysing these dynamics. Yeah.
I can't even do my son's year 7 maths, so I think you're amazing. Craig?
Thanks, Andrea. I'm Craig Wood. I'm the talent acquisition team leader for APM Group for the non-employment services side of the business. And what that relates to is healthcare and wellbeing. So occupational rehab, clinical rehab, psychological services, assessment services, aged care, communities, disabilities, and New Zealand. And I've been working in the healthcare space and community development space for roughly 9 years now. Love it. Such a great silo to work in. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Mona, I just was having a giggle. Someone's put your hair looks fabulous again. Mona's one of the lucky people that is married to a hairdresser.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks, Jasmine. I did see your comment pop up there too. Clearly, he's too busy at the moment to attend to his wife's hair, but I've been assured I will get an appointment. But I'm Mona. I head up talent acquisition for our institutional bank at Citi. I've been with the bank for coming on 8 years and have worked across the consumer bank, all of our support functions, operations, and have been supporting the institutional bank for about 3 years now. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Terrific. And Liz, you're on mute at the moment, so there we go, and I'll hand over to you.
Trying to make sure I'm so trained to be on mute, right? Muted at all times in case I have some sort of colossal failure on a call. I'm Liz. I spent 6 years before I joined Amazon Web Services recruiting and living overseas in Asia and Europe. And now I lead our commercial sales hiring for APJ. And as I said, I work for Amazon Web Services, so it's actually the cloud computing and heavily tech arm of Amazon, and get to recruit exciting folks like solution architects, sales, marketing, all those types of people.
Hang on. I love it. Michelle muted me just to get rid of the background sound. Golly, how many people wish I had a mute button, hey? So just to start off, I'm going to throw to the three TA people and just ask you what are sort of some of the trends and impacts that you're seeing in the market, and then I'll get Callam to give his economic viewpoint. So who should we start with? Liz, are you good to start?
Yeah, sure. So obviously from the tech industry, we've been heavily impacted by border restrictions, both from a state perspective and an international perspective. The flow of talent has been really compromised. I think from the tech talent perspective, the industry is very reliant on international sponsorship. So We're seeing incredibly competitive behaviour, both from a compensation and benefits perspective, but also really increasing personalisation of offers, really custom built to kind of target particular individuals. It's been really challenging because we have such a huge skills gap, particularly in my space around the cloud computing. You know, we commissioned a study that says we're 6 million down in the types of profiles we need for 2025. So I think we've had to get really creative and accelerate the building of skills. And so the other trend that we're seeing is this massive upskilling and career pivoting piece. I think I've never seen so many deep dive tech skills announcements, right? You're seeing it from IBM, Microsoft. You're seeing a lot more of those apprenticeship style approaches. We have a great partner for this with our Restart program with Goanna Solutions. So, you know, there's a big theme that's very connected around competition, intense competition, you know, which has been really challenging for our recruiters. And then this skilling. And then the final thing, and I was saying it to Mona just before we started, I sort of joke, I feel like our market has turned into Japan, like super passive, you know, engagement rates are challenging, trying to really engage and attract and develop a conversation with tech talents that are so in demand. They're just fending off so many approaches that sort of, given the lockdowns, I think they've sort of just said not now. And so trying to sort of open up that dialogue and conversation has been a big theme in 2021.
About financial services?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities with what Liz just mentioned. She's experienced in tech across financial services too, and I think that kind of lends itself to the array of different types of roles that you will find within the bank. There's certainly pockets, you know, in technology, but also pockets such as compliance and audit that we're finding a real skills shortage. A lot of the time, the people we're bringing were from offshore to fill these spaces. The local knowledge and talent just isn't wide enough to be filling the requirements that we have across the landscape here. But then, you know, on the contrary, there are other areas within the bank, you know, such as some of our investment banking pockets where, you know, a lot of the juniors coming through the ranks get to a point in their relatively early career where they want to take their careers offshore, and that hasn't been happening for the first couple of years. So we've been lucky enough to be able to retain that talent. But, you know, they have been getting antsy. They have been looking for the next challenge because, you know, this roadblock that has occurred in their career that they didn't expect so early on, they're not happy to just stay and kind of, you know, get monotonous in what they're doing. So it's really come about, you know, how are we going to keep them engaged? How are they seeking new opportunities within the local market, and then how we're retaining that talent as well. And, you know, echoing what Liz said, I've never experienced a market like this where, you know, last year I was on maternity leave, so I know there was challenges that happened there, but coming into 2021 where, you know, a lot of the people who had pushed back exploring other opportunities last year because no one was really sure which way this was going to go and how it was going to impact the market. And now out there looking for roles, whether it's from the business side who are getting all the headcounts approved and now have the ability to recruit these roles that were on hold last year, but also candidates who had put off looking for roles who are now feeling more confident in exploring new opportunities. And almost every candidate we're speaking to has competing offers. You know, so we're really having to come in strong, and it's not just about money anymore either, but it's, you know, really having a look at EVP years, what can we offer in terms of, you know, that work-life balance, what learning opportunities, what career development opportunities, and of course the money all comes as a package. What are we able to offer them to be able to, you know, be an attractive enough offer against the other two or three that they're looking at that time. So yeah, super challenging landscape. But yeah, I think everyone's experiencing differently across.
Well, I think the person that's probably got the biggest challenge at the moment is Craig. You must be so busy.
Yeah, slight understatement there, Andrea, slight understatement. But definitely echo what Liz and Mona are saying. And in the healthcare space, the increase in services and the service requirements, particularly within the mental health space and also the rehabilitation space, and the shortage of talent is a real conundrum at this point. More contracts are coming through, more service requirements are coming through, and the people just aren't available at this point. And there's also what I'm sensing is a sense of fatigue within the medical profession as well, which creates a sense of hesitation. They're still interested in having conversations and interested in exploring, but that last step towards commitment, there's a reservation there, and that reservation is growing. And similar to yourself, Mona, we're one of 4 or one of 5 that a candidate has an offer for. And it's about speed, but it's also about juggling the haste with the experience, because if the feedback we've received from candidates is that they feel pressured. So how do we compete without that sense of pressure as well? Salary is an anomaly at this moment in the healthcare space. Grads in particular, 15, 20K plus from what they've previously been offered, demanding with no experience. But one of the positives out of this is that we've seen some of our frontline roles really benefit from the COVID experience, as people unfortunately were displaced from their previous employment, and they've picked up roles in our contact center work. They've picked up roles in our community. So we've seen some great wins whilst we're experiencing some challenges as well. One of the other positives is an internalization. So the whole COVID experience, the trend has been to look internally to see what we can do as an organization to support TA, to support retention, and what initiatives can we bring in that are outside of the salary piece, because we can't always compete with salary. So it's been quite an interesting journey with some really positives, some real challenges. But that key is that internalization that I've seen in a lot of organisations, which has been much needed.
I think the very first in-person event I'm going to do next year is about internalisation of talent and internal mobility. Callam, is what these guys seeing, what these folks seeing, what you're seeing from an economic outlook?
Oh, absolutely. What they're saying is showing up very clearly in the data that I analyse quite regularly. So, I mean, what we're dealing with right now is really just an unprecedented increase in demand for talent across the country. It has been concentrated to some degree in things such as healthcare and tech, but it really is across the board. And the speed with which it has picked up has really been quite startling. We've gone from a situation where last year there was barely any jobs available, so many people unemployed, to a situation where we've never seen this many jobs available, and the unemployment rate is pretty low. If this was a transformation that had taken place over maybe 5 years, recruiters could have adjusted to it. But that hasn't been the case. Now, there's a few numbers that really jump out to me. So job postings on Indeed are 57% above where they were on February 1 last year, which is where they were before the pandemic began. So that's really strong growth over an 18-month period. Before the pandemic, there was 3.1 unemployed people per job vacancy across the country. That's now down to 1.8, which is the lowest level in at least 40 years. That's how far back the data goes. I suspect we're probably looking at the lowest level in 60, 70, 80 years potentially, just because of how unusual the current situation is. And all of that has happened at the same time that borders have been closed. So Australia's population has effectively stopped growing. So we've had this huge increase in demand. Supply is not doing much at all. In some cases, supply is actually weaker for certain industries, and that's created some of the most challenging hiring environment that we've ever seen. And I think that's reflected for most recruiters across the country, across a wide range of different industries.
I actually think we talk about the fatigue of doctors and the medical staff, but let me tell you, I am seeing a lot of very tired recruiters at the So look, we've had all of these COVID restrictions. 2 of the biggest cities have been locked down. Melbourne's out this Thursday. As you said, our unemployment rate is low, and especially compared to March and April last year. So, Callam, can you talk a little bit about why is I mean, we're talking about our unemployment rate being low, but it's not necessarily a good indicator of what Australia's labour market is like. So, I mean, we know it's busy.
Yeah, this is really quite interesting, and I suppose it's more sort of a technical economics question, but I'll sort of step through it, and hopefully it'll all make some sense. So, in Australia, the unemployment rate has traditionally been the go-to measure of labour market conditions. It's sort of the one the media always focuses on, and it's a good sort of summary measure of what's going on. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't always do a great job of measuring labour market conditions during lockdown. And so I guess the main reason for that is because to be considered unemployed from a statistical standpoint, you need to be both actively searching for work and available to start work. And I suppose you could understand why that may not always be possible when you're in lockdown, because legally sometimes you can't do much of anything. So as a consequence, most of the people who lost their jobs during lockdown aren't immediately classified as being unemployed. Instead, from a statistical standpoint, they're actually considered to have stopped wanting to work. And this has led to the unemployment rate being underestimated among regions that are in active lockdown. So, for example, right now in New South Wales, the official unemployment rate is 4.6%. That's really low. And in normal times, we'd be really happy about that from an economic perspective. However, the actual unemployment rate is probably closer to 10.5% once you account for all the people who have lost their jobs over the past few months. The same is true of Victoria. The official rate is 5.1%. The actual rate is probably around 7%. Now, there are no such measurement issues with states unaffected by lockdown. So in WA, the unemployment rate is 4.1%. That's both impressive and completely legitimate. Same with Queensland at 4.9% and South Australia at 5.1%. So this is really only an issue that we have when places are in lockdown. But when we are in lockdown, it has a pretty big impact upon how we measure these things. The unemployment rate, it's been driven lower this year, obviously, by the strong demand for talent, the fact that there are so many jobs available, and those jobs are eventually filled, hopefully, which causes the labour market to tighten. So overall, while the lower unemployment rate is a good economic story and a challenging recruitment situation, I mean, that's mostly true for most states, even if the data in New South Wales and Victoria is currently a little bit goofy. Hope that made sense.
I was going to ask the panel about where they're seeing the shortages and those sorts of things, but we've kind of covered that off at the beginning. So let's talk about these jolly international borders. Are they open? Are they not? You know, who's in charge? You know, do we think that when these borders actually do open to people other than families returning, it's going to have an immediate impact on the economy? And given the stringent requirements perhaps to get in, expensive airline tickets, do they quarantine, do they not? We're all still trying to work that out. You know, do we anticipate international travel resuming to be enough to bring back what we need in Australia at the moment? Callam, I'm going to start with the economic point, and then I'm going to get these guys to tell me what impact it will have for them.
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of moving parts to this, and there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding what's going to happen with borders and international travel and the like. That's still not 100% clear for I think any of us right now. But I think progress is going to be pretty slow. I mean, I wouldn't expect tourism or travel numbers to return to anything like pre-pandemic numbers next year. And you know, it could take a number of years before that sort of normalizes to what we once considered normal before the pandemic began. I think skilled migration will be interesting because while Australian businesses will be desperate to get talent here, businesses in other countries are doing the same. The demand for talent hasn't just increased in Australia, but across a wide range of countries. Every country that Indeed looks at, and we're talking the US, the UK, France, Germany, and Singapore, and India, demand is just really strong. And so job seekers are going to have a lot more choice than normal as to whether they choose to stay home or come to Australia or go to another country. So this is going to be a really interesting area over the next couple of years, just given how important it is, but also given the uncertainty that there is around this as well. Sorry, Andrea, you're on mute.
I had to do it at least once. I live and work on St George's Road in Fitzroy North. There's trams going past all the time, so I have to keep muting myself. So Liz, we know tech roles are being affected. We can't find a tech recruiter to save ourselves, most of us. So, you know, for you, what's the outlook of the borders opening up?
Yeah, I think Callam, the complexity that Callam touched on is really worrying us. So in the first instance, it's like, great, but we can't go back to normal. And already we're seeing some anecdotal feedback around that, right? You know, I've had a candidate that I actually spoke to just yesterday that actually decided not to proceed now that borders are open because they're like, we need to come and go from Australia and we're not confident that you're going to be able to provide that we're going to be stuck there. So it has really damaged the brand of Australia in a bit in terms of them knowing that people exiting Australia are only citizens and permanent residents, not visa holders. That kind of thing has been a big issue that's well noted. So I think the attractiveness with this international opportunity may take a bit of a hit and it makes it take some time to recover. The other thing that we're seeing is a lot of requests for, well, why do I need to move? Just give me a fully remote role, which has a lot of complexity with, you know, tax and issues that may or may not make it as attractive as they think to work for an Australian company as well. So just, again, I don't have any hard data, but I'm just really concerned. And then the simplistic thing is, how are we going to get this? We have such a backlog of people. It's unclear around the number of flights coming into the country. That still might lead to delays before we can really get things up and running. I think there's some unclarity with how Queensland and WA are going to operate as well. And perhaps what we've also seen this year is some conflict between states versus the federal system that owns immigration that has been concerning.
Mona?
I think that's a common theme. You know, there are concerns there. Callam and Liz both touched on, you know, there's so much unclarity about how is this going to happen, what's the impacts going to be. And I think, you know, speaking to candidates and speaking to people in my network in general, there's also this fear of, are we going to hemorrhage more people out of Australia than what's coming in? You know, typically we have been an relatively attractive place for people to come and work, and we haven't had so much trouble bringing those people into Australia. Now they are hesitant because of those reasons that Liz just mentioned. Do they come here? Do they get stuck? You know, what's their comfort level around coming to Australia and potentially going into another lockdown and not being able to leave again? But the other element is also, you know, how many people do we currently have in Australia working, just waiting for these borders to open up? And then they want to go home. They want to go and see their families. They want to go and spend time with, you know, the people that they've lived with in their communities and in their country, home country. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see, you know, what that balance ends up being once we do open the borders. Sure, we'll be able to get some people back. You know, are we going to lose more people than what comes in at that point is, I guess, still a big question.
And Craig, I'm going to do it slightly differently because, you know, the rumours have it that Melbourne is hemorrhaging people up to Queensland and South Australia. God knows why anyone would want to live anywhere but Melbourne, but they are. So there's almost an added complexity around a national movement. You know, Melbourne's brand seems particularly damaged.
Definitely, and we're seeing. I stick with Melbourne as well, but we're seeing that in the businesses in APM Group that Melbourne is one of our more challenging areas to recruit into. You know, Sydney as well. So the two most effective lockdown areas are the two most challenging locations to recruit. So there is a reflection there, and that's just domestically. With the international borders opening, we're actually seeing it slightly differently in the healthcare space. We have people that are interested in moving, and because some of the countries that they're moving from, they're desirous to move from. You know, but it does open that question around entry. So the considerations from the business perspective, where we traditionally went for a TSS, we're now looking at PR to provide people that assurity to bring them in. You know, and the choice is, the candidate has a lot more options in the negotiations or the conversations around relocation, and the need for health, allied health, occupational therapists, physios, and psychologists is growing and growing and growing. That the international borders opening are highly relevant and highly favourable for those particular cohorts. So we're seeing, I hear about the obscurity definitely, but particularly within that IT space, APM has a bit of a luxury that we have a footprint globally. So we've actually been able to recruit into one of our UK businesses for IT staff to work from UK, and when the borders open and there's more comfort, then they'll relocate across, and that's been part of the conversation. For our health people, different conversation because we don't have that footprint, but there is still that obscurity around what does it look like. So I definitely echo the sentiments of Mona and Liz. Slightly different in the health space though. There is a desire.
Yeah. Now, you lot are so chatty, I'm going to run out of time, but I do want to get this, definitely this question in. And let's move a little bit to diversity. So we know that COVID disproportionately impacted women, and indeed, if you haven't seen their latest D&I survey, it also found that it disproportionately affected younger workers, and we've heard that today in a number of presentations, but also Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So do you see our post-COVID world still proportionately impacting these groups? Callam, what's your feedback on that?
Yeah, the dynamics here have been really quite interesting. I mean, throughout the lockdowns last year, huge impact upon women, huge impact upon younger Australians and Indigenous Australians as well. Job losses were highly concentrated in those areas. A lot of people in those cohorts work in sectors that are heavily sensitive to lockdown. But the jobs recovery for these groups has been really quite impressive over the course of this year. And that was before the Sydney and Melbourne lockdowns, obviously. By mid-year, the unemployment rate for women had fallen to 4.7%. That was the lowest level since December 2008. The same is true for underemployment among women, which is women who have a job but would prefer more hours. So women were not only finding employment, they were also finding employment that met their needs in terms of hours as well. And it's been the same for younger people. So by mid-year, the unemployment rate was the lowest for younger people since early 2009. So younger people have benefited job-wise from closed borders, fewer foreign students, backpackers competing for jobs in areas such as hospitality and retail. So that's been reasonably good as well. I mean, normally the impact of a recession would linger longer for younger people and than for other groups. And that was certainly true in the 1980s and the 1990s recessions, but it certainly hasn't been the case during the pandemic recovery thus far. And I don't think that's going to fundamentally change as we sort of begin the process of opening up our economy. Addressing the job market for Australia's Indigenous population is quite difficult due to a lack of timely data. So I've searched high and low for any data that I could find on how that recovery is progressing for Australia's Indigenous population. There's not much data out there. The most recent estimate we have for Indigenous unemployment was 18%, but that was back in 2016. It was roughly 3 times what the unemployment rate was for the rest of the population. And if that is still true today, then we'd obviously still be looking at an unemployment rate that's in the double digits, which is far too high. Now, I've been pretty optimistic about jobs for both women and younger people, but I should note the following. So job losses during the recent lockdown have been heavily concentrated in those groups once again. So they're doing it pretty tough across New South Wales and Victoria right now. Those aged 15 to 24 accounted for half of all job losses over the past couple of months, but only account for around 15% of overall employment. So heavy concentration there. For women, they account for around 53% of job losses over the past 2 months, which is a little bit higher than their 47% share of employment. So as long as lockdowns continue to happen, we're going to see that burden fall primarily upon women and younger Australians. But I'm reasonably optimistic given that the strong rate of job creation that we have seen and continue to see, that once these states open up, that the unemployment rate for these groups will head lower quite quickly.
Who's not on mute? You're all on mute. Liz, have you seen anything that purports to that about disproportionately affecting?
Well, definitely there's disproportionate impact, but I think from my organisation's perspective, we're hiring more young people. Probably, I think the biggest impact is in that sort of 15 to 19-year-old bracket. So I think what we're seeing in what we're trying to do is we're increasing our graduate hires, we're increasing our internship hires, we're increasing our investment in alternative talent channels. So we're actually had a fantastic year for inclusion, diversity and equity in Australia in terms of increasing representation, and also in terms of sponsoring and investing in women or people from disadvantaged groups upskilling. So investing in credits for cloud computing skills has been a big focus this year. So I think we've tried to look at the situation and offer a bit of a lifeline in terms of how can we help people retrain and reskill, and then also just trying to reinvest because of the challenges with senior tech talent, try and double down on growing talent in that space. So I think we've noticed that and tried to see it as an opportunity both for the business but also for those individuals. So that seems to be the kind of trend that we're seeing as a result of those numbers.
Craig, you know, the healthcare wellbeing space is a very feminised industry, and so a little less impacted in some ways. But what would you say to what's going on for you?
We haven't seen any shift at all. In the health industry, it's predominantly roughly averages 70 to 75% people who identify as female work within the health or wellbeing industry, and we haven't seen a shift in that. It could have increased slightly. We have seen some increases in older adults coming into the business as well and providing opportunities for the older adults cohort. Our First Nations recruitment has remained steady as well. So we traditionally haven't seen any impacts.
And financial services is always an interesting one.
We've had it is historic. Lots of blokes, but we have had the gender diversity, which has been great. We had done a lot of work in that space fruits of that labour kind of coming to fruition now. So it has been great. I think, you know, echoing what Callam and Liz said around early careers is probably really where the gap is now, and a lot of investment going in there, trying to really build up the talent programs and graduate programs, and try and bring in that talent from you know, straight out of uni, or even representation within universities as to sort of the career options that are there to try and attract, you know, more people to come into banking in general. But yeah, fortunately from a gender diversity perspective, we have had a great year. But you know, from a First Nations perspective and also the junior talent, there's certainly a lot of work to be done there.
Okay, so I'm going to have to finish it there because we're sort of 5 minutes away from ending. We had some other stuff to talk on around remote work and talent attraction, but look, if you haven't, I have signed up to a lot of Indeed's insights that they put out. And I've actually put it in the Q&A so you can upvote if you would like to hear from Indeed, but also I've put it in the chat. I highly recommend getting in touch with the Indeed folk and get a personalised session from them on how to attract talent. The insights that Callam always offers feed into the Indeed's talent strategy. So if you'd like to hear from Indeed, pop something up in the chat or upvote in Q&A, and we'll pass your details on to them. And Sally McKibben, who's on today, one of the fabulous salespeople, one of my faves, will be in touch with you. But Callam, thank you so much. You actually helped me understand unemployment rates with an economic technical viewpoint. So well done you. That's a big thing.
Always happy to help.
Thank you, Callam. I really appreciate it. And Liz, Mona and Craig, you two are absolutely endless speak and your insights. I absolutely and utterly think we have to do this again. So perhaps in the new year, I think we'll just do a whole hour, get the four of you back on again to talk about what we're seeing, because it was just amazing. I can't thank you enough for making yourselves available.
Thank you, Andrea, and I think it'll be great to hear how everyone's progressing on this whole journey, you know, a few months from now, and see how it all evolves and what we're experiencing then.
So, folks, we're going to leave the platform open for a bit longer for you to move around the tables and please do so. We start again tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and it's another fabulous day. Would love to share on socials if you've enjoyed it, and encourage people to buy tickets for tomorrow. So these presentations will all be made available to you post-event, so you will be able to re-watch them back again. So thank you everyone for joining today. I'm going to finish the presentation now. Stay and have a chat on the tables if you'd like. And I need the presenters to turn your camera and mic off. Everyone, Michelle's just here to my left giving me my instructions as usual. You all know how we operate here. So I'm going to turn the presentation off now. Hopefully Callam will stay on a table and you can have a chat with him. And I look forward to chatting to you on the tables now. I've got to start a what? I'm not allowed to close the presentation yet. Turn yourself off. I'm turning myself off.